They showed up on my porch with grim smiles and cheap badges, and in that moment I sensed that everything I thought I knew about suburban life was about to collapse. My wife was 8 months pregnant, her belly round with our first child, and I remember watching her step out onto the porch, all kindness and curiosity, ready to greet whoever was there. Instead, these two women brushed right past her polite hello, wearing identical polo shirts emblazoned with the letters HOA. I had never seen them before, never heard of the so-called enforcement committee they claimed to represent, and yet they carried themselves with an arrogance usually reserved for people who carry real badges. That day would unravel every comfortable assumption we had about the neighborhood, about who holds power, and about what one man might do when his pregnant wife's life is on the line. Before I say another word, let me tell you this. I had no taste for violence, no thirst for confrontation, no desire to ever point a loaded Glock at another human being. But if you'd seen what I saw, if you'd heard the gut-wrenching cry that tore from my wife's throat as her arm was twisted until the bones snapped, you'd understand why I did it. You'd understand why the muzzle flashed before they blinked. Why I emptied the Glock 19 without a single apology. The worst part is that it all started with a simple question about lawn maintenance, or at least that's how they framed it when they barged onto our property on a scorching afternoon. My wife's name is Caroline, though everyone calls her Carrie. She was standing at the threshold, leaning gently against the doorframe so as not to strain her back. When we realized these women were from some version of the HOA, Carrie smiled in relief and tried to ask about the nature of their visit. The taller woman, with silver-streaked hair pinned behind her ears, jabbed a clipboard in Carrie's face and demanded immediate access to our backyard. She spoke in clipped sentences, rattling off nonsense about code violations, refusing to offer any real explanation. The other woman, a blonde with a rigid posture and an expression like she'd just smelled something foul, scanned our porch as though she was searching for evidence of wrongdoing. They seemed like caricatures of authority, posturing with plastic badges that read HOA enforcement, yet giving off the unmistakable vibe of private security wannabes. I was a few steps behind Kiri, emerging from our living room when I saw the pair of them crowding her, practically forcing her backward. Instinct kicked in, I approached, asking if there was an issue. The blonde's head snapped in my direction, eyes narrowing. "Stay back," she barked. "This is official HOA business. Your property is out of compliance." "We have the right to conduct an inspection." The claim sounded absurd. Yes, we lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, but every representative I'd met before had been polite, knocking on doors with a friendly face, maybe carrying a printed notice about lawn height or garbage can placement. These two exuded hostility. My pulse quickened as I noticed how tightly the taller one gripped her clipboard, as if it were a weapon. Carrie tried to explain that we had no prior warnings, that we'd paid our dues on time, that we hadn't changed anything about our yard recently. The blonde sneered. "Your grass is half an inch too long. There's debris near the fence line, and your dog has been seen off-leash. All of these are violations that incur fees, and we're here to enforce them." Carrie's cheeks flushed with confusion. She asked them not to crowd her and insisted that we'd be happy to talk through any legitimate concern. The tall woman brushed that aside. "We're past talking," she said, lips curling. "We're authorized to levy immediate fines and, if necessary, take steps to ensure compliance." That was when I first felt a trickle of dread. They weren't just rude. They were threatening. And for reasons I couldn't fully grasp, they had singled out our home. Carrie told them that she was pregnant and didn't appreciate being intimidated. She tried to stand her ground, but the blonde hissed back. "Pregnant or not, you follow the rules. If you won't let us inspect your backyard, we'll do it ourselves." I remember stepping forward, placing a hand on Carrie's shoulder to steady her. I said we would not be bullied, that we had every right to see official credentials, and that our property wasn't open for random searches. In the seconds that followed, it was like a fuse had been lit. The tall one shoved past Carrie, making a beeline toward the side gate. Carrie gasped and reached out to stop her, resting a hand on the woman's shoulder. That's when everything shifted from tense to violent. The tall woman whirled around and twisted Carrie's arm with a brutal jerk, the motion so sudden and savage that I heard the snap of bone. The sound was wet and sharp. I can't forget it, no matter how many nightmares I relive. Carrie's scream pierced the humid air, cutting through any illusion of suburban peace we'd harbored. She collapsed onto her knees, clutching her belly with her free hand. The blonde woman moved in, as if to restrain her further, and that was when my vision turned red at the edges. Nothing else mattered in that moment. No laws, no worry about consequences, just the burning need to protect Carrie and our unborn child. I lunged forward, but the tall one blocked my path again, brandishing the clipboard as if it were a shield. I shoved her aside, not caring that I was crossing some line. The blonde grabbed Carrie by her wrists again, forcing a twisted angle that made Carrie shriek a second time. My heart thundered, pure rage pulsing through me. I still remember the exact instant I decided to reach for the Glock. We'd kept it inside a locked box near the front door, ever since a string of burglaries had plagued the neighborhood. I never imagined I would use it in broad daylight, but there I was, sprinting into the house while Carrie's sobs echoed behind me. My hands shook as I punched in the code. The adrenaline made my fingers clumsy, but the beep of the lock disengaging felt like unlocking a final barrier. The Glock 19 felt heavy in my grip, heavier than I'd expected, the metal cool against my sweaty palm. My mind roiled with fear that I might be too late, that Carrie would be lying on the porch with more than a broken arm by the time I emerged. When I rushed back outside, the blonde had forced Carrie onto her stomach, pressing a knee into her lower back. The tall woman was standing guard, spouting nonsense about citizen's arrest for non-compliance. Carrie groaned in agony, her free hand still clutching her belly to protect our baby. My breath caught in my throat. I raised the gun, my voice cracking as I demanded they step away. The tall woman spun around, eyes widening at the sight of the Glock. I should have paused, should have counted to 3, but my fury demanded immediate action. "Get off her," I growled, stepping forward with the weapon raised. Instead of backing down, the blonde pressed harder on Carrie's back. That final cruelty sealed their fate in my eyes. I fired a single shot into the air, a thunderous warning that rattled the stillness of the neighborhood. The crack echoed off nearby houses, and I heard a distant dog barking in alarm. For a second, neither of them moved. Then, the blonde looked up with something like a sneer crossing her lips, as if defying me to pull the trigger again. I wasn't about to let them crush my wife's ribcage or harm our child, so I aimed lower, determined not to kill but to incapacitate. 2 quick shots, ringing out almost in unison, hammered my eardrums. The tall woman screamed as a bullet ripped into her thigh. The blonde let out a ragged cry, clutching her upper arm. Their arrogance collapsed in an instant. Both reeled back, tumbling away from Carrie. I dropped to my knees beside her, gently lifting her into my arms. She gasped in pain, tears streaking her cheeks. The relief on her face, seeing me there, was quickly overshadowed by the anguish radiating from her fractured arm. "It's okay, Carrie," I whispered, my own tears burning. "It's going to be okay," but I wasn't even sure if that was true. The intruders lay sprawled on the lawn, cursing and moaning, threatening lawsuits and telling me I'd ruined my life. Meanwhile, Carrie's whimpers tore at my heart. Neighbors began peering out from behind curtains. A few bolder ones stepped onto their porches, wide-eyed. Then came the sirens, shrill, approaching, swallowing up the stillness. The police arrived in a chaotic rush, multiple squad cars skidding to a stop. Their real badges glinted under the sun, a stark contrast to the cheap plastic pinned on the two women who had attacked us. Officers flooded the yard with guns raised, shouting orders for me to drop my weapon. I placed the Glock on the grass, hands raised high, voice trembling as I tried to explain what had happened. Within moments, paramedics were kneeling beside Carrie, placing her on a stretcher, carefully immobilizing her arm. I pleaded for them to be cautious, telling them she was pregnant. They nodded solemnly, wisping her toward the ambulance as I stood helpless, my pulse roaring in my ears. That was how I found myself cuffed in the back of a police car, giving a frantic statement about intruders claiming to be from the HOA. The real HOA, if they showed up at all, never came with batons, never snapped arms, never pinned pregnant women to the ground. It took half an hour of urgent explanations before the officers realized that Carrie had indeed been assaulted, that these two women had no legitimate credentials, that I might have acted in self-defense. As soon as they confirmed I had no prior record, that neighbors had seen at least part of the confrontation, the officers removed the handcuffs. I was free to follow Carrie to the hospital. Nothing, not even the adrenaline of the confrontation, could prepare me for the sight of Carrie in the emergency room. Her face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead as she clutched her belly with her uninjured arm. A doctor told me she had a spiral fracture in her forearm, which could complicate the rest of her pregnancy. My stomach sank at the thought of her being in constant pain these next few weeks. The baby, thank God, seemed to be stable, but I could see in her eyes the fear that something irreversible might have happened. I gently stroked her hair, murmuring reassurances I wasn't sure I believed myself. That night I paced the hospital hallway, a dull ache in my own chest from all the tension. They had set Carrie's arm in a cast, given her pain medication safe for pregnancy, and recommended bed rest. I barely slept in the chair beside her bed. Every so often I'd see the image of those two women, fallen on my lawn with bullet wounds, playing over in my mind like a broken film reel. In one sense, I felt justified. They'd attacked my pregnant wife, and I'd done what I had to do. On the other hand, I was already bracing for the legal and emotional fallout. The next morning, a detective came by to take a more detailed statement. I explained the entire sequence of events, emphasizing that these women had forcibly broken Carrie's arm. He nodded, scribbling in his notepad. "Huh. They're claiming you shot them without provocation," he said carefully. My temper flared, but I managed to keep my wife steady. Look at my wife. She's pregnant with a broken arm. They pinned her down. It was anything but unprovoked. The detective assured me they would sort through the evidence and witness statements. Meanwhile, the two intruders were under arrest in the same hospital, recovering from non-life-threatening injuries. The detective confirmed that their badges were fakes, and no official HOA recognized them as legitimate enforcers. Carrie was discharged late that afternoon, her arm in a cast, tears still brimming every time she moved. We went home, though home no longer felt safe. Police tape cordoned off a section of the yard where we'd had the confrontation. Neighbors stared from behind closed windows as we shuffled inside. I helped Carrie onto the couch, propping pillows around her to keep her comfortable. She winced with every tiny motion. I kept repeating that I was so sorry, that I wished I'd stopped them sooner, that I should have realized something was off the moment they stepped foot onto our porch. Over the next few days, the weight of what happened started sinking in. The local news picked up the story, painting me as the homeowner who shot HOA officers in front of a pregnant wife. At first, the headline sounded like I was the aggressor. But as more facts emerged, that these women were imposters with a history of intimidation, that they'd inflicted a brutal injury on Carrie, the narrative shifted. Reporters began calling them fake HOA enforcers. A swirl of rumor and speculation surrounded them. Some articles hinted that maybe they were part of a larger scheme, pressuring homeowners into selling. Others suspected they were just con artists looking for easy marks. Carrie spent her days in a fog of pain meds and worry. She'd sit on the couch, gently massaging her belly, whispering to our child that everything would be okay. I tried to occupy my thoughts by investigating the matter further. Real HOA representatives told me they had no clue who these women were. One official, an older man named Clarence, apologized profusely for the confusion and insisted their neighborhood association would never sanction such violent tactics. He hinted that certain unscrupulous developers were eyeing the wetlands behind our street, but that he couldn't imagine it leading to something so extreme. That was when I started hearing rumors about Redwood Venture Properties, a company that had been buying up parcels of land near the wetlands. Locals whispered that Redwood wanted to build something big, maybe a resort or a retail center, but the wetlands were legally protected. If Redwood found ways to push out or intimidate homeowners, maybe they could reclassify the land. It was all speculation, but my gut told me there was more to it than chance. Imposters, intimidation, sudden violence, these don't just happen over a foot-tall fence or a slight mismatch in grass length. Carrie tried to keep her spirits up, focusing on the fact that our baby's heartbeat was strong. But some nights I'd find her quietly weeping, staring at her cast, or flinching at every car that passed by. The sense of violation was overwhelming. The silver-held detective, his name was Sosa, stopped by a couple times, asking follow-up questions. He mentioned that one of the suspects was refusing to talk, while the other insisted they had every right to enforce HOA code, though she couldn't produce any real documentation. He also told me something that made my blood run cold. The suspect claimed more officers would be coming to continue the job. That might have been an empty threat, but it sent us into a spiral of paranoia. I installed a security camera at the front door, set motion detectors near the fence, and tested the locks on every window. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, Carrie was lying in bed, dozing while I checked the mail. Tucked among the bills was a glossy letter from Redwood Venture Properties. It read like a cheerful invitation, offering a generous buyout of our home. My jaw tightened. There was no mention of wetlands or condemnation, just a pitch that Redwood was seeking to invest in the area and would love to purchase properties from willing homeowners. The figure they quoted was suspiciously high. I slammed the mailbox shut, a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. That night, I confronted Carrie with the letter. She looked alarmed, pulling it from my hand to read it. "This can't be a coincidence," she murmured, pressing her uninjured hand over her belly. I nodded grimly. Redwood might be behind those women, or maybe the women were independent scammers who latched onto Redwood's plan. Either way, I saw a pattern that spelled trouble for us if we refused to sell. A few days later, we heard that a neighbor 3 doors down, a widow named Mrs. Donahue, had sold her home to Redwood and moved out in a hurry. Another neighbor, a middle-aged couple, suddenly disappeared after complaining about bizarre harassment. Stories began to leak out. Repeated code citations with no basis, knocks on the door late at night from strangers claiming to represent the HOA, calls demanding compliance fees or else. The more I heard, the more convinced I became that Redwood was orchestrating a campaign to empty our block, or at least the properties close to the wetlands. But I had no proof, only suspicions and the lingering sense that Carrie and I were in the crosshairs. Meanwhile, the legal side of our ordeal trudged forward. The 2 imposters were charged with aggravated battery, trespassing, and impersonating officials. Our local prosecutor reached out to see if Carrie would testify when the case went to trial. She agreed, though the prospect of reliving that day terrified her. My own role was murkier. I had shot them, and though it appeared to be self-defense, the DA had to confirm that the force I used was justifiable. Sosa assured me that the evidence favored our side. Carrie's injuries, witness statements, and the defendant's track record all pointed to me acting to save my wife. Still, the weight of possible legal repercussions gnawed at me. I didn't regret protecting Carrie, but I hated that we had to live under a magnifying glass while her arm throbbed in a cast. As the weeks wore on, Carrie's due date crept closer. She could no longer do many basic tasks on her own, so I took time off work, not wanting to leave her side. One day, while I was out on the porch, I noticed a black SUV idling down the street. Every time I glanced its way, it moved a little further, as though trying not to be obvious. My neck prickled. I snapped a photo with my phone, just in case. Sure enough, when I took a step off the porch, it sped away. Was Redwood surveilling us, or had these women's associates shown up to exact revenge? I felt trapped, anxious, constantly on high alert. Carrie attempted to find solace by focusing on the baby. We converted the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting soft yellow walls, placing a cradle by the window. Each brushstroke was an act of defiance, a claim that we weren't going to be driven out or terrorized. Sometimes we'd talk in hushed tones about what life would be like once the baby arrived. If Redwood's intimidation escalated, would we be forced to move for the sake of our child's safety? Neither of us wanted that, but the question hung in the air. About a month after the shooting, Redwood's official representative, a sleek man named Harold Tate, knocked on our door. He wore a tailored suit and flashed a practiced smile that never touched his eyes. Before I could say anything, he handed me a packet of papers. "I understand there's an unpleasant altercation here," he said in a smooth voice. "We at Redwood want to ensure nothing like that ever happens again. So here is a cash offer to buy your home at a premium." I stared at him, anger simmering under my skin. "We're not for sale," I said through clenched teeth. Carrie was behind me, peering over my shoulder. Tate's gaze flickered to her cast and the curve of her belly. He shrugged, the motion so casual it made me want to scream. "I respect your decision," he replied, "but let's be realistic. This is a developing area, and Redwood is investing heavily. If you choose to stay, who's to say these random incidents won't keep happening?" His words carried a clear threat. I asked if Redwood employed 2 female enforcers who impersonated the HOA. He feigned ignorance, adjusting his cufflinks. "We outsource security in certain regions, but Redwood does not condone violence." Then he lowered his voice, leaning in just enough that I caught the stale smell of his cologne. "The reality is that tensions can flare when progress is on the line. Surely, with a baby coming, you want peace of mind. Think of this as a generous opportunity to move somewhere you'll feel safer." My hand tightened on the doorknob. Carrie, behind me, breathed unevenly. I forced the door shut in Tate's face, telling him to leave. Through the window, I watched him stroll to his car, unhurried, like he already knew we were stuck. That night, Carrie broke down. She curled up on the couch, sobbing about how she hated feeling like a prisoner in her own home. I held her, biting back my own frustration. We debated calling the cops again, or contacting Sosa to see if Redwood's antics could be tied to the imposters. In the end, we realized we had no direct proof, only an onslaught of circumstantial evidence. Redwood was careful, layering threats and polite offers. The next morning, a local news reporter named Marisol knocked on our door. She introduced herself, explaining that she'd been investigating Redwood's expansion and had caught wind of our situation. She asked if we'd be willing to go on record about the assault, the intimidation, the buyout offers. Carrie glanced at me, uncertain. I told Marisol we needed time to think. Exposing Redwood publicly might be the only way to push back, but it also risked antagonizing them further. Carrie, already fraught with nerves over her broken arm and the baby's impending arrival, worried about painting a target on us. After Marisol left, we sat in the living room, turning the decision over and over. Ultimately, we agreed to share some details with her, hoping public scrutiny would make Redwood back off. Over the next week, Marisol interviewed us carefully, respecting Carrie's fragility. We showed her the phony HOA badges we'd found tossed aside in the yard after the shooting, the Redwood buyout letter, and the business card from Harold Tate. She recorded Carrie's account of the arm-breaking incident, tears welling in Carrie's eyes as she recounted how it felt to have someone clamp down on her while pregnant. Marisol's sympathy was genuine, but she also had the determined glint of a reporter chasing a big story. She promised to protect our identities if we preferred anonymity, but we figured Redwood would know it was us anyway. So we let her use our names, hoping the truth would overshadow Redwood's spin. Shortly after Marisol finished her interviews, the paramedics had to rush Carrie to the hospital. She woke up one morning with sharp pains, worrying she might be going into labor prematurely. My heart pounded like a drum as we sped to the emergency room. Doctors ran tests, discovering that stress and physical trauma had induced early contractions. They managed to stabilize her condition, but warned that any additional stress could put our baby at risk. I recall standing in the hospital corridor, praying silently that Redwood or any other threat would just vanish. My anger at the whole situation flared with each beep of the monitors tracking Carrie's vital signs. Meanwhile, word of Marisol's upcoming expose reached Redwood, or so I guessed, because 2 days later I found our mailbox smashed, the post leaning drunkenly to one side, with a note taped to the splintered wood. It said, in crude handwriting, "Stop stirring trouble. Leave if you know what's good." I took photos, called the police, filed a report. Another petty act of intimidation. I replaced the mailbox, glancing over my shoulder with every swing of the hammer. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from unknown numbers that hung up the moment I answered. I found myself carrying the Glock around the house, checking to make sure it was secured but accessible. The fact that I might have to use it again made my stomach churn. Carrie, growing heavier with each passing day, tried her best to remain positive, but I could see the tension etched on her face. She worried about the baby's health, about postpartum recovery with a still healing arm, about Redwood's next move. Whenever we talked about just accepting Redwood's buyout, a wave of indignation rose in me. This was our home, our life, our child's future. Why should we be forced out by bullies? Around that time, the DA's office informed us that the arraignment for the two imposters was scheduled. Carrie and I attended briefly, though she had to sit down due to her condition. The imposters wore prison jumpsuits, glaring at us with pure venom. The blonde seemed especially bitter, mouthing obscenities. Outside the courthouse, a local camera crew swarmed us for comment, but I shielded Carrie from the chaos, quickly guiding her away. We wanted justice, not a media frenzy that could worsen her stress. Week passed, quiet but unnerving. No more mailbox vandalism, no more unannounced visitors. We guessed Redwood might be waiting to see if the expose would run, or if we'd back down. Then came the day Marisol's story hit the local news, splashing across TV screens and online headlines. Fake HOA enforcers linked to suspected developer intimidation. She laid out the chain of events, from the break-in attempts to the buyout offers, and highlighted Redwood's repeated denials. She was careful with her words, not accusing Redwood of hiring criminals outright, but painting a damning picture of coincidence and motive. The piece stirred public outrage. Viewers were horrified to hear about a pregnant woman's arm being broken in the name of HOA enforcement. Redwood issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and reaffirming that it abhorred violence. But the damage was done. Public opinion tipped against them. For a brief moment, Carrie and I felt like we could breathe again. Maybe Redwood would retreat. The phone calls slowed. Tate didn't show up with any more contracts. We spent time finalizing the nursery, painting whimsical clouds on the ceiling. Carrie was able to remove the cast and transition to a brace, her arm still sore but improving. Hope flickered that we might get through this nightmare unscathed, that the baby would arrive into a safer world. Then, late one evening, I was in the nursery assembling a rocking chair while Carrie dozed in our bedroom. I saw movement outside through the window. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's cat slinking by, but then a distinctly human figure slipped across the side yard, heading toward our back fence. My heart lurched. Grabbing my phone, I switched off the nursery light so whoever it was wouldn't see my silhouette. Pressing myself against the wall, I peered out again. The shape crouched near the fence, fiddling with something. I realized with dread that they might be trying to tamper with our gate or cut wires to our security cameras. I dialed 911, whispering my address, telling them there was an intruder. My mind jumped to Redwood's intimidation or an accomplice of the fake HOA enforcers. Either way, I wouldn't let them catch us off guard. I hurried to the bedroom, waking Carrie gently, urging her to be silent. She blinked in alarm, eyes wide as I helped her up. We retreated to the living room, where the curtains were drawn. I locked the door, glancing at the cabinet where I kept the Glock. My hands trembled as I considered how quickly an evening could turn violent. Within a few minutes, the faint glow of flashing lights played against the walls. Police arrived quietly, shining flashlights around the perimeter. I heard them shout for someone to freeze, followed by scuffling noises. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might pass out. Eventually there was a knock at the door. An officer explained they detained a man who claimed he was just looking for a lost pet, but he had no ID and seemed suspiciously well prepared with a set of bolt cutters in his backpack. They took him into custody. My knees nearly gave way. Carrie was pale, pressing a trembling hand to her belly. I breathed a silent prayer of thanks that, this time, the threat had been stopped before it reached our doorstep. After that incident, the police presence around our neighborhood increased. A few more suspicious figures were reportedly spotted near vacant homes Redwood had purchased. It seemed like a mini crime wave, or at least a wave of intimidation. Marisol dug deeper, uncovering more cases of property vandalism connected to Redwood's expansions in other parts of the county. Community outcry surged. Some local officials, previously complicit or indifferent, began distancing themselves from Redwood. The city council launched an investigation into alleged intimidation tactics. Meanwhile, the trial date for the imposters approached. Carrie prepared to testify, though the stress weighed on her. She was due to give birth within weeks. Doctor visits became more frequent, checking that the baby was still doing fine despite the ongoing turmoil. I juggled my job remotely, reluctant to leave Carrie alone for too long. Each day felt like a balancing act between defending our home, ensuring Carrie's health, and avoiding a complete mental breakdown. At last, the trial began. The court was packed, reporters milling about. The imposters faced a string of charges from assault to impersonation. The prosecution led with evidence of their prior arrests, the phony badges, and eyewitness accounts. Carrie took the stand, voice trembling as she described the moment her arm snapped, tears brimming when she recounted the knee pressed into her back. My anger flared just watching her struggle through the story. The defense attempted to claim that the women believed they had legitimate authority, that Carrie resisted, leading to an accidental injury. But the doctor's testimony about the severity of her fracture, combined with our neighbors' statements, painted a picture of deliberate violence. On the third day of the trial, Redwood's name came up. The prosecution hinted at a possible link, suggesting these women had approached other homeowners to push them out. The defense objected, calling it speculative. Still, it left a cloud of suspicion in the courtroom. By the end of the week, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict on multiple counts. The judge spoke sternly about how their actions endangered an unborn child, condemning them to significant prison time. Carrie and I clung to each other in relief, though we knew Redwood itself wasn't in the defendant's seat. The rumor was that Redwood kept its hands clean by hiring third-party consultants, but none of that was proven in court. The very night the verdict came down, Carrie went into labor. It started with mild contractions that grew steadily stronger until we realized we had no time to lose. I drove her to the hospital in a blur of excitement and lingering fear that Redwood's shadow might still loom. But for once, fate showed us mercy. Carrie delivered a healthy baby boy after an arduous labor. Tears of joy stained both our faces when we heard his first cry. In that instant, all the tension and dread receded, replaced by awe for this tiny life in our arms. I vowed never to let anything harm him. We brought him home to the house that Redwood coveted, a house that now felt different, suffused with the warmth of a newborn's presence. Carrie's arms still ached from time to time, but the cast was gone, replaced by a stiff brace she wore only if she felt strained. News of Redwood's questionable practices continued to swirl, fueling more investigations. Marisol ran follow-up stories about Redwood's alleged intimidation across multiple developments, and public pressure mounted on local leaders to act. Redwood's stock plummeted, and eventually the company announced it was pulling back from certain projects, citing community concerns and regulatory hurdles. They never admitted wrongdoing, but they quietly started selling off some properties they'd acquired. By the time our boy was 3 months old, Redwood seemed to have vanished from our immediate vicinity. A few of their houses went on the market again, often at a loss. The vacant ones attracted some vandalism, ironically. We heard rumors that Redwood's top executives were under federal scrutiny for corruption, though I never confirmed the details. What mattered to us was that the black SUVs stopped appearing at night. No more suspicious knocks on the door. No more men lurking around the fence with bolt cutters. Life settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by feedings and diaper changes, by Carrie's gentle laughter as the baby gurgled in her lap. We replaced the porch boards that had splintered during the confrontation, painted them a cheery shade of green to symbolize renewal. Occasionally, the memory of that day would ambush us, a loud noise triggering Carrie's flashback of the bone snapping, or me jolting awake at midnight, convinced I heard intruders. But each day that passed without incident healed us a little more. A few months later, Detective Sosa stopped by to check on us. He'd heard Redwood was under deeper investigation and that we might be called as witnesses if the feds uncovered a direct link between Redwood and the imposters. We told him we'd cooperate if needed, but he said it might never come to that. Redwood was a big beast and it could take years to untangle their shady dealings. In the meantime, Sosa wanted us to stay vigilant, but also to live our lives. So we did. Our son learned to crawl across the living room floor, his bright eyes full of wonder as he patted the spot where Carrie had once collapsed in agony. That memory used to burn me with anger. Now it filled me with a bittersweet gratitude that we'd survived. We'd stood our ground in the face of intimidation that defied reason. We had the legal scars to prove it, but we were still here. Sometimes, neighbors would gather for a barbecue, marveling at how calm the street felt compared to a few months prior. Clarence from the real HOA occasionally joked that we'd given his association a black eye in the media, but he was glad the truth came out. A year later, Redwood fully withdrew its expansion plan near the wetlands. Reports indicated the protected status of that area had been reinforced by a combination of legal action and negative publicity, so Redwood couldn't bulldoze it into oblivion. Carrie took me by the hand one evening, leading me down a path by the wetlands, pointing to the birds settling in for the night. We stood there in a comfortable silence, our son squirming in a baby carrier strapped to my chest, and felt a profound sense of relief. These wetlands, which had been the rumored reason behind Redwood's hostility, remained untouched, a haven for wildlife and a reminder that some fights are worth the cost. Now, when people ask if I regret pulling the trigger that day, I say regret isn't the right word. I regret that it came to that. I regret that violence was forced upon us, that Carrie had to endure a snapped arm, that our baby was nearly born into turmoil. but I don't regret defending my family in our own front yard. If the law had arrived a few seconds later, or if I'd hesitated, who knows how far those imposters would have gone. They acted like they had the right to do anything under the banner of a phony badge. Protecting my pregnant wife was an instinct as old as human bonds. So no, I don't regret it. We faced the storm Redwood and its minions stirred up, and we made it through. Carrie's arm eventually recovered enough that she hardly notices any weakness, except on cold days when it aches faintly. We watch our son toddle around the yard, chasing a ball on the very grass those women once claimed was too long. We never replaced the bullet-riddled boards on the fence where my shots went astray. They stand as silent witnesses, small holes in the wood, a reminder that some lines can't be crossed without consequences. Sometimes I catch Carrie running her fingertips over those holes, her eyes distant. But then she shakes off the memory, scoops our son into her arms, and points at the wetlands, telling him that's where the herons live. That's where the frogs sing at dusk. Life goes on, stronger than fear. The house remains ours. Redwood slunk away, battered by public outrage and legal scrutiny. The fake HOA enforcers were taken out of the game, serving their sentences. Carrie and I hold on to each other at night, aware that the scars of that day will never fully disappear, but comforted by the knowledge that we prevailed. Sometimes neighbors still approach me, asking if we might want to move somewhere safer. My answer is always the same. This is our home. We fought for it. We bled for it. We built memories here that no intimidation can erase. As our child grows, I'll teach him that we once faced a moment so dire it could have torn us apart, but we stood firm. That lesson will outlast Redwood, the phony enforcers, and every nasty rumor. It's the legacy of resilience born from the day I emptied the Glock 19 to save my pregnant wife from a tyranny that wore a pretend badge. Some nights, I stand on the porch alone, gazing at the patch of lawn where everything unraveled. The crickets chirp, the moonlight casts soft shadows on the fence. In that calm hush, I feel a complicated swirl of relief, sorrow, and triumph. Relief that Carrie and our son are safe. Sorrow that we ever had to face such cruelty. Triumph that we refuse to back down. I inhale deeply, smelling the night air, remembering how it felt thick with heat and dread. Now it feels like a testament to survival. I step back inside, lock the door, and check on Carrie sleeping soundly with our son in a crib nearby. No badge, no corporation, no bullet can break the bond of a family determined to protect one another. That is the quiet truth overshadowing every tactic Redwood tried, every fake HOA law these women invoked. The line was drawn, and we didn't flinch. In the end, we're just ordinary people who found ourselves at the center of an extraordinary conflict. One that revealed a deeper corruption lurking behind the polite veneer of suburban development. We discovered how easily power can be abused, how fragile peace can be when confronted with greed. Yet we also discovered our capacity for courage, for unity, for protecting what matters most. Our child will grow up knowing that once upon a time, his mother's arm was broken by false enforcers who used intimidation as a weapon. He'll know that his father fired a gun not out of malice, but out of love. He'll learn the difference between real authority, grounded in justice, and the hollow authority of those who twist laws for profit. And maybe, just maybe, that knowledge will help him navigate a world where others might still try to bully their way into power. He'll remember that you don't need a real badge to commit real harm, and you don't need official backing to stand up for what's right. You just need a reason strong enough to keep you firm, and for me, that reason was Carrie and our child. That's how it happened. That's how my pregnant wife's arm got crushed by fake HOA cops. That's why I emptied the Glock 19 before they blinked. And that's how we found ourselves staring down the barrel of corporate greed, violent imposters, and the precarious dance between law and outlaws. We survived it all, battered but unbroken. We did it without fleeing, without selling out, and without bowing to a system that favored intimidation over decency. There's no heroic music playing in the background, no grand statue commemorating our stand, just the hush of a neighborhood that finally belongs to its residents again, just the sound of our child's laughter as he toddles across the grass. And if ever the day comes when another threat surfaces, we'll stand just as firmly as we did then, guided by the same fierce love that propelled me to defend my family when every second mattered. Because that's what home is for: shelter, sanctuary, and the place where you draw your line and say, enough.